So we have our two candidates for two of the different county commission seats here. Danny Glidewell with District 2, immediately to my left, and then farther over at the far end of the table, Bill Fletcher, District 4. We're glad that you're both here. We're going to do similar format to what we've done with the other candidates, and that same intro question that you've heard answered previously, and that question is, and you have 90 seconds to answer that. And we'll start. We'll go ahead and start at this end with Mr. Glidewell. In 90 seconds, please state your name, the office you are seeking, and then answer the following question: what do you think are the most important solutions at the county level to address sea level rise and flooding?
My name is Danny Glidewell. I'm running for County Commission District 2. And y'all need me to use the mic? And as far as at the county level, I believe to protect our dune lakes with changes in the development code is important. Changes in the development code to make sure that we build away from the dunes, and to handle our stormwater. Stormwater is a big issue in Walton County, and we've not done a very good job in the past of handling stormwater, so addressing the stormwater issue would be of paramount importance as far as the local government.
Very good. Would you share that microphone?
I'm Bill Fletcher, and I'm running for County Commissioner in District 4. Got some literature back there on the table if you'd like to learn more about me. I may have misunderstood the question. Did you say what can the county do to prevent?
I'll restate it for you. What do you think are the most important solutions at the county level to address sea level rise and flooding?
I don't think there's much they can do to prevent sea level rise. I think that's a global problem that we have to work with countries all over the world to try to address. The United States can't do it alone. Florida certainly can't do it alone. As far as the flooding problems, we've not taken care of the infrastructure in this area for years and years, and you see just horrible scenes in some of these areas and neighborhoods because of the heavy rains that we get. Those can be addressed. We just haven't addressed them. That's one of the reasons I'm running. The infrastructure that we have here and more building, uncontrolled building. We tear down dunes to build multi-million-dollar homes on. I was on the zoning board at a meeting last month. They were asking for a variance to build a 12,000 square foot home on a dune. Told us they would have to take 5 or 6 feet of the dunes down, and it passed. I made a motion to deny it, but it passed. So there's a lot we can do. We just haven't been doing it.
All right, Mr. Fletcher, we'll stay with you for this question, and the question will go to both of you. It'll go to Mr. Glidewell after you. So the question is, according to Flood IQ data about Walton County specifically, sea level rise plus a Category 3 hurricane would cause flooding-related damage in 21,653 homes this year. What can we do now to protect these areas?
Well, I'll go back to that previous comment. We've got to stop tearing down the dunes and building these homes. The dunes are very critical to prevent that. I kind of think and as far as the houses that we build, we've got to beef up the type of housing we build. They're still building stick-built homes along the beach, and I think we should dictate concrete or reinforced housing to be built, because you're going to get blown away if you're made out of wood, and that's been proven time and time again. I think they should consider looking at concrete barriers along some areas that are very vulnerable.
Well, stormwater and handling that is the number one thing that we need to do. July 1st, when we had the walk on the beach, at the end of it, the bottom fell out, and Grayton got a nice little bit of rain, and we were wading in about that much water pretty quick. There were people's cars it was almost getting into the cars because there's simply been no solutions made for the stormwater. We need to really look at building on those dunes. The dunes are there by God to protect us from hurricanes, and when you tear those things down, then you get what you expect, or you get what you are going to get, and that's destruction. So we need to make sure that those dunes are protected.
Okay.
And we'll stay with you for this next question, and then go to Mr. Fletcher. What role should Walton County play in community education on sea level rise? Is there an education program that you would champion?
Well, I think education would probably be more the purview of the school board. So I would defer to the school board as far as education, but we need to...
So the question is about community education, so I do think of a broader role outside the classroom that you could address.
Well, forums like this are certainly helpful, and I think those would be things that we need to promote as community-based forums where people hear and there's some interaction between their government and the citizens. So that would be my solution to that.
Yeah, I think everybody would be in support of an educational program, and it has to start at a young age, but I think it even applies to the adults. A lot of people are not even familiar with how serious the problem is. I don't know how many of you went to the Safe Water meeting last night, but there's some startling facts that come out about things that are happening all over the state. But I would definitely champion, I think the colleges, our local colleges should be involved with it, and our local government to press for more education.
I do want to remind everybody, keep sending those questions in, especially because most of you live in Walton County, and you've got some issues and things in mind that we may not know coming from Pensacola and Tallahassee and other places. So be sure to get those questions into Allie, and I'll happily read them up here. So we'll stay with start with Mr. Fletcher for this next question. What is your single most significant personal or professional accomplishment regarding sea level rise, the environment, energy conservation, or sustainability?
I've done absolutely nothing to help the sea rise, but in my professional life, I really felt kind of proud of this. I helped to start a small company, and we handled, as too bad Dr. Z isn't still here, we handled coal combustion byproducts from the power plants. I helped to start the company in the late 70s and took over as the CEO in '88 and grew it to one of the largest in the United States that dealt with those products. Now, there's a lot of useful applications for coal combustion byproducts. It's probably in the building you're in right now. It's on the roadways out here. We took literally millions and millions of tons. Instead of putting them in a landfill or sluicing them out to a pond, we would put them into constructive applications and actually made a lot of money for the utilities and a little bit for ourselves.
What was the question again?
Sure. It is, what is your single most significant personal or professional accomplishment regarding sea level rise, the environment, energy conservation, or sustainability?
Well, on the environment was recent. This was last year. In one of our neighboring counties, there was a permit, and it's still ongoing, to permit a leachate injection well through the Floridan aquifer, a mile plus down into the ground. I thought that was a horrible idea. I think it's a threat to our water. I think it could destroy our way of life. So I went to the city councils in Paxton and Defuniak and advocated and got them to pass resolutions against that. They were the second and third municipalities to do that. Freeport actually did it on their own first, but I was very proud that our community stuck up for each other and stuck up for our environment and stuck up for our water, because without water, we're all going away. We can't live here without water.
And
I want the cowbell now, come on.
yeah. Just wanted to use it on you guys.
I'm an Alabama fan, we don't do cowbell.
You guys are obeying, staying with the time.
I got to watch you over now. It's totally get to them.
So we'll start with Mr. Glidewell on this one. Addressing sea level rise and flooding will require actions from all levels of government, but where do you think the county needs to play a role in leading the response to sea level rise and flooding?
I don't think the county can do a whole lot about sea level rise. We can do a lot about water and stormwater flooding and protecting our area and protecting our way of life, and that starts with just basic stormwater. If you can't handle your stormwater, you need to stop building. And we've come to the point in this county where we need to really look at slowing down until our infrastructure catches up. And that, like I said about the problem in Grayton, that problem goes all along 30A. That problem goes along just about everything in South Walton. If we get a little rain, it floods. And that's because we haven't taken care of our business, and we continue to allow them to build way too many houses and destroy the pervious surfaces. And because of that, we get more stormwater. So we need to address that.
I think about the only effective thing the county can do is to make a loud noise to the state and the federal governments to assist. I mean, they're the ones that can make it happen. I think the options for the county is pretty limited, other than making a lot of publicity about it and asking for help from the state and federal government.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fletcher, we'll stay with you for this one. We'll start with you. In what ways is sea level rise related to human impact on the environment?
Well, you know, I've read a lot over the years, and you get conflicting theories and stories about it, but it seems to me, and of course I've made my living with the coal burning plants, but I think that has to be minimized as much as possible. I'm really disturbed that we haven't mandated solar on new housing in this part of the world, in particular, anywhere where it's practical. And there's a lot of areas in the United States, and we're one of the top ones for it. The solar panel efficiency has improved so dramatically in the last 20 years. I'd be in favor of mandating any new construction would have solar energy panels.
Sure. In what ways is sea level rise related to human impact on the environment?
Well, I echo, I guess, what Bill says, other than the sea is rising, but as far as the human impact, if we would stop building in bad areas, we wouldn't have near as much human impact. So we need to look at limiting. When you allow somebody to build a house in a swamp, you're gonna have problems, and that's a lot of what we've done is we've destroyed our wetlands by allowing people to build houses in swamps, and we need to stop that.
Okay, so let's stay with you, Mr. Glidewell. Florida's counties could take a large hit to their property tax revenues in 2045. This is looking out into the future, research that's been done, due to lost income from flood-prone properties. What is your plan to mitigate some of these flood risks and/or the risk to the local budget?
Well, I'm not sure that we'll take the hit that you're describing, because the properties inland will become more valuable. So I think the problem is people losing what they've invested their life savings in, and we lose some of our identity as communities. So we need to make sure that we address those things. We need to make sure that where it's possible we limit people from building in places that are going to be impacted in the next 20 or 30 years. And if an ounce of prevention, as was said a while ago, is worth a pound of cure. So don't let them happen to start with.
Well, I think, going back to my earlier statement, if we beef up the structure that we're building out there and minimize the cost to replace and repair those after these storms, that could be huge. And again, the dunes and protection barriers to the damage coming in from these storms, we have to be proactive in that. And I tend to agree with Danny there. If that happens as we move people off the beach and further back, those lands are going to become more valuable. We see that now in Walton County big time. You're seeing in Freeport and Definiak Springs, the property values are starting, especially in Freeport, to accelerate dramatically.
Very good. So we've got several questions that will be, just to vary things a little bit, will be answered only by one of you and not by both of you. So we'll start with you, Mr. Fletcher, with this one. How have you or your family seen or adapted to sea level rise in your lives or in your community?
We haven't. I mean, it's something that I don't have any control over. I'm concerned about it like everybody else is, but I live in a house on pilings. and so I'm not in much danger. But if it keeps going, you extrapolate this data and go forward 50 and 100 years, I foresee they'll have to stop building dramatically along the coastlines all over this country. So it's just a major problem that has to be addressed. As far as me doing something I haven't done.
Yeah, and so next question from Mr. Glidewell. Many unified local mitigation plans are geared towards shovel-ready projects, but do not take into account hardening needed to account for sea level rise. What policy changes would you enact to ensure if they do, or excuse me, ensure that they do?
Well, I'm not convinced that we need to do a lot of hardening. I'm not convinced that seawalls and things of that nature aren't.
And I would just let me state some other question. And I think by hardening they just mean, they don't necessarily mean a seawall. They mean building infrastructure that doesn't go underwater or can resist the surge of a storm. That's where it's a general term for hardening. It doesn't necessarily specifically means a wall. But yeah.
I was going to say I'm not convinced about that, but we need to have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe even a 15-year plan of infrastructure needs, and have those projects pre-engineered and ready to go. So if the funding becomes available, we can have them shovel ready pretty quick. And that goes from roadways to stormwater. I think anything that we build south of the bay should be built in with stormwater taken into consideration, and not just piling it into big old retention ponds and growing more skeeters. We need to actually treat that water and use that water. As Bill talked about last night, we had a Safe Water for Walton meeting, and the ironic thing is that we have a shortage of water around the state, and that we have springs drying up because we don't have enough water in the aquifer. So we need to look at that.
Very good. So, and Mr. Fletcher, you sort of touched on this a little bit before in some of your earlier answers. This question is about, the question is, what would you propose to address the root causes of sea level rise? And I know you mentioned earlier that it's an international issue and everybody needs to work together, but thinking specifically at the county level, is there not something the county can do to play a part in that larger, picture?
I go back to saying the county just the most effective thing they can do is make a lot of noise about the issue, the problem. Get whatever data we've accumulated that shows us where we're heading, and then try to get help out of the state and the federal government. But I'll repeat again, this is a worldwide, global problem that we need the United States to lead the parade, work with all the countries around the world, and try to address this, because we can't do it alone, and the county certainly can't.
Mr. Glidewell? As a commissioner, how do you plan to support both business interests and the need to address sea level rise in our community?
Well, as Bill said, sea level rise is something that the county has a very limited voice in, as far as how that impacts our business. The tourism industry is the bulk of our economic engine in Walton County, and protecting the beaches and the shoreline is the #1 way that we could impact business. So protecting our shoreline, protecting our beaches, protecting our bay. Our bay is dying, and while sea change or whatever is important, the fact that the bay is dying because we've dumped huge amounts of fertilizer and bad water and stormwater into it, that's just as bad too. So we need to protect our bay, our river, and our shoreline. And the county can do that.
So we're going to go back to questions that both of you answer, and we'll start this one with Mr. Glidewell. And that question is, as sea level rise continues along our coast, how will you work with both the citizens who want to build seawalls and those who wish to create a living shoreline on their property, which would be, marsh grasses, oyster reefs?
Well, the way you deal with that is by your land development code, your comprehensive plan. And as I said a while ago, I'm not convinced seawalls are not counterproductive, that they tend to be eroded around and they tend to exacerbate the problem. So if we build well back of the shoreline and we build well back of the coastal setback line, that's going to help our shoreline become more natural. And protecting those dunes should be the county's, the dunes and the dune lakes, or should be the county's #1 goal as far as the beaches, because those dunes protect the inland areas from hurricanes. So when you allow somebody to build a 12,000 square foot house on a dune, you're allowing them to threaten the houses inland to be destroyed by hurricanes. So we need to protect those dunes and our dune lakes.
And same question for you. Shall I restate the question? Okay. As sea level rise continues along our coast, how will you work with both the citizens who want to build seawalls and those who wish to create living shorelines on their properties?
Well, I mean, I think the only thing Commission can do is encourage the Corps of Engineers and the DEP to work together to look where it's feasible and practical and economically viable to do that. That's about all we could do.
And we'll start with you for this next question as well. So, this question, when we talked in the previous question about living shorelines, that's something that we go in and create with our own hands. This question has to do with more the natural systems that are already in place and protecting those. The question is, marshes and wetlands are critical components of healthy ecosystems and in some cases can keep up with sea level rise. How will you protect valuable wetlands in our community?
Well, that program that Danny referred to last night really touched on that big time, and it's a massive problem that is starting to be addressed. We were watching videos of them draining marshlands and wetlands and what happened to those and springs all around this state. If you haven't seen that, you'd be aghast if you watched it. So I think you just got to really have the environmental department really keep tab on that and monitor it. And what's so funny?
Our environmental department is doing that stuff. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I didn't say they're doing it. I said they should be doing it.
It's not fun.
No, it isn't. I mean, that was so. I don't know about you, Dan, but that was a sobering presentation last night, folks. It was kind of scary.
Well, it was scary because our area of the county, of the state, is one of the leading areas for springs, and a large part of the north part of the county and the area is made up of some beautiful springs, and we're at risk of destroying those because we keep pumping water in huge amounts out of the aquifer. So we need to as far as wetlands, it makes no sense to have a code where you allow people to destroy wetlands, because those wetlands not only allow the stormwater to percolate and get out of the system, but they also, when you build on those, you have to raise the level of fill, so you're dumping that water on somebody else's property, which is wrong. And then because you filled in that wetland, it's still going to come back, and we've got places all over the south end of the county where we see flooding over and over and over. People's property is, and I'm not going to get that bill.
So that ended that. So the next question starts with you again, Danny. Yep. And actually, it ties in somewhat with you talking about the safe water for Walton and this issue, groundwater, and this is a question related to groundwater. And it relates to saltwater intrusion, which is the process whereby when we withdraw fresh water in coastal areas, saltwater moves in to replace that and can contaminate wells. So the question is, as sea level rise increases the risk of saltwater intrusion, how would you manage the risk of contamination in water supply wells for coastal communities?
Well, that's probably more of a state question, but there again, that goes back to your code. And not only, in some cases we have a good code in Walton County, we just don't enforce it very well. And in some cases we don't enforce it at all. So we need to step up our enforcement, and as was said a while ago, we need to make sure that our environmental enforcement is what it should be. And if we do that, then we protect ourselves somewhat from saltwater intrusions. That's a huge problem because that contaminates the whole aquifer, which messes up everybody's wells. So we need to make sure that we enforce the rules that are already in place, and if they're not strong enough, get some, tighten them up. But right now, we're not enforcing anything.
Well said, Danny. I can't add anything to that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Let's do one more that we had on our list, and then we're going to go to some audience questions. So, this one relates to the dune lakes. It's been touched on a little bit, but given the threat sea level rise poses to our coastal ecology and the dune lakes in particular, what, if any, changes would you support to the county's comprehensive coastal management plan? And this would start with Mr. Fletcher.
Well, I would immediately suspend the construction of new homes on these dunes. It's been rampant for years and years. And I envy those folks that have a beautiful view out there sitting on top of those dunes, but I don't think they were meant to be built on. And I would put a building moratorium not only there, but probably in some other parts of South Walton until we address the infrastructure issues. We just, as Danny said, we enforce them, but we do it selectively. And it's a sore point with me.
Well, the dune lakes are the crown jewel maybe of Walton County because they're so rare. There's only one or two places in the world where those exist as they exist here, with the freshwater lakes that have the meandering outfalls that are intermittent. So we need to really strengthen up the buffers on those dune lakes. We need to strengthen up our building code on those dune lakes, and we need to make sure that that those outfalls are protected. The one over at Oyster Lake is a disaster because we allowed building right up there against it, and now we have basically a ditch, and it's got riprap all over it. It doesn't serve the purpose for which God intended it, and those outfalls should be protected, and they should be allowed to meander as they were intended instead of building riprap ditches, which is not going to help anything.
And we'll start with you for this next question, back to the funding issue, and this relates to the massive amount of BP funding that's coming and can continue to come into for many years in the future post the post BP oil disaster of 2010. So the question is, the BP oil spill funding means we have an opportunity to restore our coastline. What would you do to bring more BP funding to our local area, and perhaps use it most wisely as well?
Well, from what the people who are on the local committee tell me, our major problem right now is that we haven't really followed the rules that the state Triumph Board outlined to receive that funding. We haven't ranked projects, we haven't properly vetted those projects, and we haven't got the matching funds that the state wants to see. So we need to start following the rules, and we might get that money. I think we also need to really concentrate on purchasing property along the shoreline, purchasing property along the dune lakes. If those are county properties, then we can protect them, and we can make sure that's built on, and we can have adequate spaces for our future tourists and future residents to enjoy those areas. So we could certainly try to buy some more of it with some of those BP funds if we could get them.
The BP monies is kind of a sore point for me. I served on the Triumph Committee, for Walton County Triumph Committee, and frankly we were useless. We ranked all these different requests for money for different projects, and it didn't mean anything. We go through this whole process, and it's actually going to go to a state group. So I think the only solution we have is to get somebody in our county government I think we probably should have a lobbyist, for the lack of a better word, to work on that in Tallahassee, because that's how things get done in this state, and particularly in this county. But you're right, there's a lot of money. I think it's like $300 million a year for the next 20 years. It's a ton of money, and there's so many things we could do. But there's a feeding frenzy out there for that money, and we've got to really charge ahead and make a strong effort to get it.
And Mr. Fletcher, starting with you for this question. Many coastal cities are buying out property owners. Many coastal cities are buying out property owners in flood zones. Others are using rolling easements where the line, I think, continues to move back over time as the water rises. What policies do you think we should have for land that is flooded repeatedly?
Oh, I think we have just started in this county in the last few years buying property to give us access to the beach or easements to the beach, and that should have started a long time ago, in my opinion. But at least we're starting in that direction now. The nice thing about that, we can do that with TDC money, so it doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. And I think that should be accelerated. I think there may even be homes on the beach that we could take out and reinforce that area of the beaches.
Not only do we need to be buying beach property, but we could buy some of these low-lying areas and some of the wetlands. There was a project, or there is a area just to the south of us, almost due south, called Fox Lake, that is in a watershed. It's wet, and the county's had a couple opportunities to purchase that at a reasonable price, and we've refused, and we've approved 2 or 3 different housing developments to go in there that's going to be a mess. And it would just be better to buy that and allow that to stay in its natural state. And the county could do that if they chose. But piling more houses in there to create even more problems is not the answer.
So an audience question that I have firsthand experience with, because I was living on 30A in 2004 and 2005 when we had Hurricane Ivan and we had Dennis, and I watched what happened with the Gulfront homes. And the question relates to that. What should be done about and the questioner uses the term temporary in quotation marks, seawalls in front of some beachfront homes? The county negotiated the permits for the owners, but owners have never obtained permanent permits. What would you do to resolve that situation?
My understanding is also that the county is paying a substantial amount of money every year to monitor those at a cost to the taxpayers. I'm not convinced seawalls is productive, and I think we need to start seriously looking at mitigating that. I'm not, as Ms. Gibson said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I don't know how to do that, but I'm willing to listen to an engineer to tell me how to do that. But everything I've heard is that seawalls are a temporary fix at best.
Well, I'm no expert on seawalls either, but I know they've been very effective in many parts of the country and the world, and I'm not sure. What was the question relative to the seawalls?
The question is that many are not properly permitted, and it's a permitting issue and management issue for the county. And as mentioned, there's some funding issues still with monitoring.
I think you enforce the code, and if they're not permitted, you take them out.
Well, with that ends our session for our 2 Walton County Commission candidates, District 2 and District 4, Danny Glidewell and Bill Fletcher. Thank you both very much.